Welcome to Devotions from Israel, a 5-minute word of encouragement. Today's devotion is from Joshua 7 and 8. I like when Scripture gives us details of a narrative, a story. Well, this story comes to us in Joshua 7 and 8. In fact, it's actually a two-part story. Already in chapter 6, Joshua and his Israelite men capture and destroy and actually burn the city of Jericho. It would be one of 3 of the total of 31 cities that was destroyed by fire. Jericho, Ai, the story in front of us, and Hatzor. Well, this story unfolds in a very unique way. After the destruction of Jericho by Joshua, we read this. But the Israelites were unfaithful in regard to the devoted things. And Achan took some of them, so the Lord's anger burned against Israel. So en route to this second city of Ai, it's actually mentioned here. It's near Beit Aven and east of Bethel. So some geographic markers here to help us locate the city of Ai. Incidentally, archaeologically, Dr. Scott Stripling believes that he has found the real Ai, although the initial excavation of Et Tel by Callaway, back probably about 50 years ago now, was at least the proposed site for the city that was destroyed in this story in chapter 8. There was another alternative site prior to the site that Dr. Scott Stripling has excavated over the last few years, and yet perhaps this is the eye of the story. But here is the story. Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, saying, "Go up and spy out the region." So when they returned, they said, "Not all the army will have to go and fight Ai. Send 2,000 or 3,000 to take it, and do not weary the whole army, for only a few people live there." So about 3,000 men went up, literally heading west up through the Judean Desert, to the hill country of Judah. This would be a city again named Ai, just to the north of Jerusalem. So about 3,000 went up, and they were routed by the men of Ai, who killed about 36 of them. Now, 36 out of 3,000 may not seem like a lot of people. However, the word, and keep this in mind, throughout the Hebrew Bible, the word Eleph in Hebrew, translated typically 1,000, like 3,000. It could very well be, a unit, or a family unit, or an army unit of perhaps 10 or 15 or 20. So if that's the case, let's say 3 units were sent, let's say 50 people and 36 were killed, well then I would call that a devastating event. So they come back to the area of Jericho, and they decide on a new strategy. And this is what we have in chapter 8. The Lord said to Joshua, to encourage him at this point, familiar words to us, "Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged." These would be the same words that Joshua would share with his people prior to crossing the Jordan River. Take the whole army now with you and go up and attack Ai, for I have delivered into your hands the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land." So Joshua and the whole army moved out to attack Ai. He chose 30,000 of his best fighting men and set them out at night with these orders. Listen carefully, and here's the strategy. You are to set an ambush behind the city. Do not go far from it. All of you will be on the alert. I and all those with me will advance on the city, and when the men come out against us, as they did before, we will flee from them, and they will pursue us until we have turned them away from the city. For they will say they are running away from us as they did before. So when we flee from them, you are to rise up from the ambush and take the city, and the Lord your God will give it into your hand. And when you have taken the city, set it on fire. Do what the Lord has commanded. See to it, you have my orders. So the next morning Joshua mustered his army, and he and the leaders of the Israelites marched before them at Ai. The soldiers took their position as we advance through this story, and when the king of Ai saw this, he and all of his men hurried out early in the morning to meet Israel in battle at a certain place overlooking the Arava. He did not know that the ambush team had been set against him behind the city. So all the men of Ai were called to pursue them, and they pursued Joshua and were lured away from the city. Not a man remained in Ai or Bethel who did not go after Israel, and they left the city wide open and went into pursuit of Israel. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Hold out towards Ai the javelin that is in your hand, for into your hand I will deliver the city." So Joshua held out towards the city the javelin that was in his hand, and as soon as he did this, the men in the ambush rose quickly from their positions and rushed forward. They entered the city and captured it and quickly set it on fire. So what's the devotional thought in this story? It's a story of war. And the Israelites, at least the second time, came out victorious. So perhaps the lesson is, of course, as the first effort failed because of sin, indeed, in our lives, we have to look at our heart, in our lives, in our patterns of obedience or disobedience, and see if God is pleased, because God cannot bless those who are disobedient against him. And yet the second attempt was one that saw them victory here. It was successful, if you will. And could it be that they went now armed with strength? They were not discouraged over the first defeat, as sometimes we can be, in life, in the journeys of the circumstances of life. We can meet defeat one after another, and yet be so disheartened that we sort of give up. And yet the Israelites did not do this. They were trusting in God this time, and his way is always perfect. And God brought victory for Joshua in a very unique way by setting this ambush behind the city. And the city was taken, and 29 other areas and cities were either taken or controlled after this. So trust your battles to God's plans. If you are one who has experienced defeat in the past, don't give up. Do not be discouraged, for God is with you. And as we avail ourselves obediently to his ways, he will walk with us and grant us peace and victory in our lives when we trust in him. So be encouraged with this story. And until next time, shalom.